The complete works of Swami Vivekananda, Jnana Yoga, Chapter 8, Realization, Part 3. Now Yama answers the question, what becomes of a man when the body dies? This wise one never dies, is never born. It arises from nothing, and nothing arises from it. Unborn, eternal, everlasting, this ancient one can never be destroyed with the destruction of the body. If the slayer thinks he can slay, or if the slain thinks he is slain, they both do not know the truth. For the self neither slays nor is slain. A most tremendous position. I should like to draw your attention to the adjective in the first line, which is wise. As we proceed, we shall find that the ideal of the Vedanta is that all wisdom and all purity are in the soul already, dimly expressed or better expressed. That is all the difference there is. The difference between man and all things in the whole creation is not in kind, but only in degree. The background, the reality of everyone is that same eternal, ever blessed, ever pure, and ever perfect one. It is the Atman, the soul, in the saint and in the sinner, in the happy and in the miserable, in the beautiful and in the ugly, in men and in animals. It is the same throughout. It is the shining one. The difference is caused by the power of expression. In some it is expressed more, while in others. But this difference of expression has no effect upon the Atma. It is in their dress. One man shows more of the body than another. It does not make any difference in their bodies. The difference is in their dress. We had better remember here that throughout the Vedanta philosophy, there is no such thing as good and bad. They are not two different things. The same thing is good or bad, and the difference is only in degree. The very thing I call pleasurable today, tomorrow under better circumstances, I may call pain. The fire that warms us can also consume us. It is not the fault of the fire. Thus, a soul has being pure and perfect. The man who does evil is giving the lie unto himself. He does not know the nature of himself. Even in the murderer, the very pure soul is there. It dies not. It was his mistake. He could not manifest it. He had covered it. Nor in the man who thinks that he is killed is the soul killed. It is eternal. It can never be killed, never destroyed. Infinitely smaller than the smallest, infinitely larger than the largest. This Lord of all is present in the depths of every human heart. The sinless, bereft of all misery, see Him through the mercy of the Lord. The bodiless, yet dwelling in the body. The spaceless, yet seeming to occupy space. Infinite, omnipresent, knowing such to be the soul, the sages never are miserable. This Atman is not to be realized by the power of speech, nor by a vast intellect, nor by the study of their Vedas. This is a very bold utterance. As I told you before, the sages were very bold thinkers, and they never stopped at anything. You will remember that in India, these Vedas are regarded in much higher light than even the Christians regard their Bible. Your idea of revelation is that a man was inspired by God. But in India, the idea is that things exist because they are in the Vedas. In and through the Vedas, the whole creation has come. All that is called knowledge is in the Vedas. Every word is sacred and eternal, eternal as a soul, without beginning and without end. The whole of the Creator's mind is in this book, as it were. That is the light in which the Vedas are held. Why is this thing moral? Because the Vedas say so. Why is that thing immoral? Because the Vedas say so. In spite of that, look at the boldness of these sages who proclaimed that the truth is not to be found by much study of the Vedas. With whom the Lord is pleased, to that man he expresses himself. But then the objection may be advanced that this is something like partisanship. But as Yama explains, those who are evildoers, whose minds are not peaceful, can never see the light. It is to those who are true in heart, pure in deed, whose senses are controlled, that this self manifests itself. Here is a big beautiful figure. Picture the self to be the rider and this body the chariot. The intellect will be the charioteer, mind the reins, and the senses the horses. He whose horses are well bred and whose reins are strong are kept in the hands of the charioteer, the intellect, reaches the goal which is the state of him, the omnipresent. But the man whose horses, his senses are not controlled, nor the reins the mind well managed, goes to destruction. This Atman in the minds of all beings does not manifest himself to the eyes or to the senses, but those whose minds have become pure and refined realize him. Beyond all sound, all sight, beyond form, absolute, beyond all taste and touch, infinite, without beginning and without end, even beyond nature, the unchangeable, he who realizes him frees himself from the jaws of death. But it is very difficult. It is as it were walking on the edge of a razor. The way is long and perilous, but struggle on. Do not despair. Awake, arise, and stop not till the goal is reached. The one central idea throughout all the Upanishads is that of realization. A great many questions will arise from time to time, and especially to the modern man. There will be the question of utility. There will be various other questions, but in all we shall find that we are prompted by our own past associations. It is association of ideas that has such a tremendous power over our minds. To those who from childhood have always heard of a personal God and the personality of the mind, these ideas will of course appear to be very stern and harsh. But if they listen to them and think over them, they will become part of their lives and will no longer frighten them. The great question that generally arises is the utility of philosophy. To that there can only be one answer. If on the utilitarian ground it is good for men to seek for pleasure, why should not those whose pleasure is in religious speculation seek for that? Because sense enjoyments please many, they seek for them, but there may be others whom they do not please, who want higher enjoyment. The dog's pleasure is only in eating and drinking. The dog cannot understand the pleasure of the scientist who gives up everything and perhaps dwells on the top of the mountain to observe the position of the stars. The dogs may smile at him and even think that he is a madman. Perhaps this poor scientist never had money enough to marry even, and lives very simply. Maybe the dog laughs at him, but the scientist says, "My dear dog, your pleasure is only in the senses which you enjoy, and you know nothing beyond. But for me, this is the most enjoyable life, and if you have the right to seek your pleasure in your way, so have I in mine." The mistake is that we want to tie the whole world down to our plane of thought and to make our mind the measure of the whole universe. To you, the old sense things are perhaps the greatest pleasure, but it is not that my pleasure should be the same, and when you insist upon that, I differ from you. That is the difference between the worldly utilitarian and the religious man. The first man says, "See how happy I am. I get money and do not bother my head about religion. It is too unsearchable and I am happy without it." So far, so good. Good for all utilitarians. But this world is terrible. If a man gets happiness in any way excepting by injuring his fellow beings, Godspeed him. But when this man comes to me and says, "You too must do these things, you will be a fool if you do not," I say, "You are wrong." Because the very things which are pleasurable to you have not the slightest attraction to me. If I had to go after a few handfuls of gold, my life would not be worth living. I should die. That is the answer the religious man would make. The fact is that religion is possible for only those who have finished with these lower things. We must have our own experiences, must have our full run. It is only when we have finished this run that other world opens. The enjoyments of the senses sometimes assume another phase, another phase, which is dangerous and tempting. You will always hear the idea in very old times, in every religion, that a time will come when all the miseries of life will cease and only its joys and pleasures will remain, and this earth will become a heaven. That I do not believe. This earth will always remain the same world. It is the most terrible thing to say, yet I do not see it my way out of it. The misery in the world is like chronic rheumatism in the body. Drive it from one part and it goes to another. Drive it from there and you will feel it somewhere else. Whatever you do, it is still there. In olden times, people lived in forests. They ate each other, whereas in modern times, they do not eat each other's flesh, but they cheat each other. Whole countries and cities are ruined by cheating. That does not show much progress either. I do not see that what you call progress in the world is other than multiplication of desires. If one thing is obvious to me, it is this, that desires bring all misery. It is a state of the beggar who is always begging for something and unable to see anything without the wish to possess it. It is always longing for more. If the power to satisfy our desires is increased in arithmetical progression, the power of desire is increased in geometrical progression. The sum total of happiness and misery in this world is at least the same throughout. If a wave rises in the ocean, it makes a hollow somewhere. If happiness comes to one man, unhappiness comes to another, or perhaps to some animal. Men are increasing in numbers, and some animals are decreasing. We are killing them off and taking their land. We are taking all the means of sustenance from them. How then can we say that happiness is increasing? The strong race eats up the weaker. But do you think that the strong race will be very happy? No. They will begin to kill each other. I do not see on practical grounds how this world can become a heaven. Facts are against it. On theoretical grounds also, I see it cannot be. Perfection is always infinite. We are this infinite already, and we are trying to manifest that infinity. You and I and all beings are trying to manifest it. So far it is all right. But from this fact, some German philosophers have started a peculiar theory that this manifestation will become higher and higher until we attain perfect manifestation, until we have become perfect beings. What is meant by perfect manifestation? Perfection means infinity, and manifestation means limit. So it means that we shall become unlimited limiteds, which is self-contradictory. Such a theory may please children. but it is poisoning their minds with lies, and it is very bad for religion. But we know that this world is a degradation, that man is a degradation of God, and that Adam fell. There is no religion today that does not teach that man is a degradation. We have been degraded down to the animal and are now growing up to emerge out of this bondage. But we shall never be able entirely to manifest the infinity here. We shall struggle hard, but there will come a time when we shall find that it is impossible to be perfect here, while we are bound by our senses. And then the march back to our original state of infinity will be sounded. This is renunciation. We shall have to get out of the difficulty by reversing the process by which we got in, and then morality and charity will begin. What is the watchword of all ethical codes? Not I, but thou. And this I is the outcome of the infinite behind, trying to manifest itself on the outside world. This little I is the result, and it will have to go back and join the infinite, its own nature. Every time you say, not I, my brother, but thou, you are trying to go back. And every time you say, I and not thou, you are taking a false step of trying to manifest the infinite through the sense world. That brings struggles and evils into the world. But after a time, renunciation must come, eternal renunciation. The little I is dead and gone. Why care so much for this little life? All these vain desires of living and enjoying this life here or in some other place bring death. If we are developed from animals, the animals also may be degraded then. How do you know it is not so? You have seen that the proof of evolution is simply this. You find a series of bodies from the lowest to the highest rising in a gradually ascending scale. But from that, can you insist that it is always from lower upwards and never from higher downwards? The argument applies both ways, and if anything is true, I believe it is that the series is repeating itself in going up and down. How can you have evolution without involution? Our struggle for the higher life shows that we have been degraded from a high state. It must be so. Only it may vary as to the details. I always cling to the ideas set forth with one voice by Christ, Buddha and the Vedanta, that we must all come to perfection in time, but only by giving up this imperfection. This world is nothing. It is at best only a hideous caricature, a shadow of the reality. We must go to the reality. Renunciation will take us to it. Renunciation is the very basis of our true life. Every moment of goodness and real life that we enjoy is when we do not think of ourselves. This little separate self must die. Then we shall find that we are in the real, and that reality is in God, and He is our own true nature, and He is always in us and with us. Let us live in Him and stand in Him. It is the only joyful state of existence. Live on the plane of the Spirit. Life on the plane of the Spirit is the only life, and let us all try to attain to this realization.